The commercial real estate world was seeing Armageddon. I finally made the move and began to say, okay, it's time. Nobody would rent to us. It was like, a coffee roaster? What? And if you look at our vision, which is to share, joy, and inspire hope that transforms our community and our world, that really is our goal. Most companies have these big, broad vision statements that, I find very trite. Ours is not. It took us a year and a half to develop those 13 words. We live it. This is what we're trying to do. Change the world, one cup of coffee at a time.
What would you say made a difference to get you to where you are from a DNA inside of Dave's standpoint?
Well, first and foremost, God. God is everything, and this is his business. We're its stewards. Our DNA, our push is all based in that.
What was the lowest of lows the past 15 years of where you had to just absolutely grit through it?
Oh, COVID for sure. Last October, that was a devastating blow too. Serving a cup of coffee when there's nothing else happening, right? And the joy it brings to these people, it's like, you don't even know what this cup means. I lost my house. I lost everything. Mm-hmm. And here's a cup of coffee.
What's up, you guys? Welcome to another episode of Successful DNA. I am with my friend here, Dave Ward. Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, it's so good to be here, Elliott.
Yeah, the founder of Buddy Brew Coffee, one of Tampa's staples. It's been a while now because it's been, was it 2011, 2012 when you founded?
2010.
2010.
Yeah.
And you were in commercial real estate.
I was.
So talk through that because I'm sure 2008, 9, 10 wasn't fun for commercial real estate.
No.
And then, starting your own companies. Let's talk through it.
Yeah. Well, the way only God can kind of orchestrate stuff. I was the junior guy, and I was on the finance side of commercial real estate. So, if there was a new shopping center being built, Publix anchored, whatever, I would go out to either Wall Street or life insurance companies to find the money to kind of fund it through, mortgages. And by really the summer of 2007, it was like the commercial real estate world was seeing Armageddon. Like it was going to be bad, really bad. Because at that time, all these deals were, and these were the first CMBS deals, they were like really coming due in the next year or two. And based on like vacancy and stuff like that, they were not going to value. So it was like, what's going to happen, right? So anyway, I couldn't even, as a junior guy, I wouldn't even see Publix deals most of the time. I started getting Publix deals and I couldn't get them funded. That's how bad it was, because those are golden, right? So anyway, at that time, I'd been home roasting coffee for, 5 or 6 years. And in any office that I happened to be in, I would kind of take over the coffee program. And people were like, what the shizzle? This stuff is amazing, right? And, and I was like, yeah, whatever. It's cool. That's awesome. So, but about that time, because the outlook was so not good, I decided, what the heck? I'm going to just play with some numbers. I'm going to write a plan and see if this thing makes sense. So over the course of the next, year and a half or two, the numbers became alive. As you start a business, all of a sudden the business kind of takes on a life of its own, and it was that way. So we threw up a website in the fall of 2008, and I'll never forget the time somebody other than my mom or my best friend bought coffee. I'm like, maybe you were onto something here, right? So by the end of 2009, still in the middle of this horrible recession, things hadn't changed. I hadn't lost my job, but it was like moved to commission only, blah blah. And there was no deals to be had. All I was doing is inspecting properties at that point. But I finally made the move and began to say, okay, it's time. The business had grown. Buddy Brew had grown to the point where it was really demanding someone full time. And so I left, and then I began to look for property, and that was right in line with what I was doing anyway. Nobody would rent to us. It was like, a coffee roaster? What? I don't even know what that means. It sounds like you're going to burn the place down now. And it was like a closed door. So the first property we ever looked at was the Kennedy property. We kind of circled back to it, and at that time they had a tenant that was bad, and so they had moved him out, and they said, okay, we'll do it. So that's kind of what happened. And the original thought, the plan was a wholesale business with an e-commerce component to it, right? With no real thought of a cafe, but a dream of a cafe maybe one day. Well, it just so happened, getting the place ready for roasting, it was really the same licensure as a cafe would be. So we're like, well, instead of having like a free tasting room, why don't we just go ahead and do a cafe? And that's kind of what all happened. And it just went like wildfire. It was unbelievable.
And then, that was 2010?
That was 2000. That was it. Yeah. Actually, we're a few days away from our 15th anniversary.
Oh, cool. So in the past 15 years, what year was the best year for Buddy Brew?
That's a great question. Well, I would say that every year has been awesome in some way. We were rising like crazy, opening cafes, wholesale expanding, really like strongly in 2018 and 2019. 2019 was a rough year, but the prospects of 2020 were amazing. I mean, the stores were on fire in January and February of 2020, and so the outlook was like phenomenal. And then COVID hit, and that was just survival. And the fact that we even did survive, is nothing less than maybe 1,000 miracles that happened during that time. But the best year, I would say, probably, I don't even know if I could pinpoint it. There's been so much. Post-COVID, we've seen just dramatic growth on the wholesale side of our business. With the advent of our distribution of our products into kind of the grocery marketplace, where we're selling to Publix, Sprouts, Whole Foods, Fresh Market, and a bunch of others, it's gone crazy.
A lot of the team, they go get lunch at Whole Foods, and they always bring back, or Sprouts, and they always bring back the bolts.
Yes.
Right here.
Yeah, right here.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
And then, so like, what's a KPI you can share so that people can understand? Obviously, we won't get into like revenue or anything, but like, what's a KPI you measure? If it's number of bags or number or whatever, like, what are you doing what did you do last year?
Well, to kind of like step back from that question a little bit, because I think it's a great question, and I definitely will answer it. You have to look at how we're structured, right? So we're really 4 businesses in one. We run 8 cafes. We have 8 cafes, actually. We run 7. We have a thriving wholesale business, which really has 2 silos in it. One is the traditional wholesale business, which is selling to other cafes, hotels, offices, restaurants, that kind of stuff. And then we have our consumer packaged good business, which is the distributed products, which is whole bean coffee and our Bolt cold brew products. Then we have our e-com business, which is still thriving to this day. Went crazy during COVID and has never looked back from that. And then we have our cost centers. So our cost centers are our roasting operation, our cold brew brewing operation, and then what we call our bakery, which is our commissary, right? So if you look at all that, that we have different KPIs for each of those segments of our business. But they're very traditional KPIs. I mean, we obviously revenue, hitting budget and all those kind of things are definitely, we track it daily. We have a dashboard that has these things, and so for the stores, we're looking at revenue. We're looking at number of transactions. We're looking at food sales, bean sales, all that kind of stuff. Those are all things that we look at. In the wholesale business, we're tracking kind of our average weekly sale into the grocery marketplace. So we track that. That's a big number for us.
That's picked up as of late.
Yeah,
right, past couple years.
It's doing phenomenally
I feel
well.
like I see you everywhere now where I used to not. So.
It's good. It's good. But if you think about from a production standpoint, we're looking, we do some special things. Like we look at roasted volume per dollar of labor is a number for us. So we know that, our roasting facility can afford this much labor based on how much they're roasting. And that's an easy number for them to kind of key on into, because as a cost center, obviously the expense side of the business is super important. We have to be very efficient in everything we do and everything we spend. So that's a number that we get to. Labor is a big one that we always are looking at.
What's the process and what's the story on getting into Whole Foods and getting into Sprouts?
Well, Whole Foods was an interesting one. That was our first. And they're so wonderful because they have a great local program, and they're always looking for locals that they can kind of get into their, stores that are like in Tampa Bay, for example, right? So we had a latte throwdown, which is kind of a gathering of all these different coffee shops at the Oxford Exchange. And it just so happened that one of the Whole Foods buyers at one of the stores was there, and I think he may have even been a judge. I may have that a little bit wrong, but forgive me if I do. Anyway, so at that thing, he was like, "Holy shizzle, this is amazing. The coffee is like mind-blowing. We got to get you into Whole Foods. And that's kind of how that whole process started. Sprouts is all my wife, and that's really more her story than mine. I think they have well over 400 stores now nationwide. And she was able to sell our Bolt cold brew products into Sprouts nationally. So we are distributed coast to coast through Sprouts.
So that's your largest, I'm guessing.
That is our largest in terms of number of locations, for sure.
Not volume, though?
Well, we sell a ton of coffee at Publix. We sell a lot of coffee at Fresh Market. We sell a lot of coffee at Whole Foods. So, yeah, but from a Bolt standpoint, for sure.
We get it from Publix.
Yeah.
Publix does a good job, too. I noticed a lot of their local beers as well.
They do. That was kind of a miracle story. And so I love sharing that one. And again, it was my wife. They out of the blue just decided, we're calling Publix. We're going to see if we can get in there. And somehow they got a meeting. And getting a meeting with Publix is not normal. You don't just get meetings. So
was it here or Jacksonville?
Oh, no, Lakeland.
Lakeland,
yep. And so
oh, yeah, when Dixie's in Jacksonville.
Yep. So they get this meeting and they show up, and it just so happened that they were meeting with the category buyer, and then somehow the VP that runs a bunch of categories heard about this, and he had just gotten back from a specialty coffee trip on the West Coast, I believe, with his daughter. And anyway, long story short was he goes, Buddy Brew, I love that company. Their logo, yeah, like I want to meet with them. And so not only did they get this meeting with the category buyer, but all of a sudden they were meeting with the big boss, the VP. And he was like,
who's they?
I believe it was Susan, my wife, and Josh Bonanno, if I remember it. Maybe Jay Charles. Anyway, but so he was like, we got to get Publix into specialty coffee. We got to do it. And so this meeting is good. We got to get Buddy Brew in our stores. So it was like, okay.
They're kind of selling you versus
oh
the
my
opposite.
gosh, it was awesome. So anyway, so that was a fortuitous meeting, and we've had just a phenomenal relationship with them ever since. It's obviously, as any relationship, it's had ups and downs, but they are a different company, and different in such an amazing way.
When was that meeting? What year?
I believe it was 2018 or maybe 19. It was. I think it was in the fall of 18. Yeah, but they're just a company with tons of integrity, and the world of distribution into the coffee, into the grocery marketplace is kind of a tough business because it's all done through distributors, and that's a wild business, and that's a business that not for the faint of heart, because they're going to grab whatever they can grab, and whether it's damaged product that they can leverage, or chargebacks for this or for that, or blah 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 blah. It's a tough business. So, but Publix, on the other hand, I mean, Whole Foods is the same way, by the way, and we self-distribute to Publix. We self-distributed to Whole Foods until the last year, I believe, where now we are working through a distributor. But we understand the business now. But it took a while. It's crazy.
And then, do you want to do more of that, I'm guessing, moving forward and,
and grow
the retail?
Yeah, we understand it now. We know what to do. We know how to dispute that charge or that charge or that charge, because it's a money grab by them. And most people, what happens is they charge all this stuff. They don't even know that it's not per the contract necessarily. And so it's like free money to them. So, but those who kind of begin to fight it, then it all kind of levels out. So it's good.
Who's the unicorn for the next big retail partner?
What's
Target?
I mean, you look at the big grocers. We're actively chasing them. We have a bunch of relationships that we can really kind of leverage to help us in that regard. That's a great question for Suze. I don't. It's not exactly on my radar, so I probably couldn't speak too intelligently about it. But from a traditional wholesale partnership, I think what's really come on strong for us is our ability to get into hotels. And we've had a couple of just great wins and great partnerships with like the Renaissance, the Gasparilla Inn, another one that, and so we've learned a lot about that business, and we believe that's a big opportunity for us moving forward.
And then you put the bolts in there and the coffee, or just one or the other?
Mainly, it's just a brewed coffee program. The gas barrel, but like for example, like the Current Hotel is a great hotel partnership. That's Oxford Commons, the main company, right? Where we help them with their actual cafe, and it's branded that way. So it's not just selling them bulk coffee to brew. It's their espresso program and all the different components. So it's a lot.
Oxford, they own the Stovall House too, right?
They do.
Do you work with Stovall House?
We do.
Cool.
Yeah, we work with all the Oxford Commons products. And they just bought Wrights. So that's a big one. And so that's
Well, I didn't
that's
know
a
that. What's Wrights?
Wrights Deli in Tampa.
Okay.
It's it's a Tampa institution as well, and so they've kept the whole infrastructure of Wrights in place, and it's really cool how they're doing it. But like Mad Dogs just opened, the new Mad Dogs, which is another phenomenal customer of ours, through Oxford Commons. It's great. So great relation. We love them. That was Oxford Exchange. That all came out of the Oxford Exchange project, and the cool thing about that one is that they said. It was like 2011 probably. They started coming into our first cafe on Kennedy, and it's like, hey, we're doing this thing and we want your coffee. And we're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Whenever you're ready, we'll be ready, right? So this kept happening over the course of the next year, and they're like, you don't get it, Dave. We want you and Susan to come by and we're going to take you on a vision walk. And so we get there, and it was still sand floors. Walls that have been half torn down. It was destruction. They were still in the demo process of that building, but they took us on this walk, and we're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be amazing. And they're like, yeah, this is big, but what you don't get is we want you here. And we're like, okay, of course we're here, right? Let's do it. So anyway, it was one of the big miracles of Buddy Brew was that relationship. And so we became part of their vision team. And so when we're designing service, when we're picking furniture or silverware, we were part of those conversations, and so it was one of the coolest experiences ever. Yeah, it was awesome.
Let's take a step back and hit the cold brew operations and the roasting operations. Is that done locally? Where you source the beans from? Just tell me that whole story.
So we source everything, it's all international. So like if you look at coffee, the coffee belt, it's really the Tropic of Cancer down to the Tropic of Capricorn, which are right around the equator. And so specialty coffee is grown at higher elevations. So if you look at that belt in all the countries that have this topography, we probably have bought from them, right? And we continue to buy from them. Our whole goal is to direct trade source all of these coffees, meaning we have a relationship with either the farmer or the co-op. So instead it kind of cuts out the middlemen. So they get to receive the benefit of this higher price that specialty coffee really demands. And it's really cool because the gift of time is that we get to see what's happening at these places. And all of a sudden there's a new irrigation system. There's a new processing facility. So it's changing their world. And if you look at our vision, which is to share, join, inspire hope that transforms our community and our world, that really is our goal, right? This is it. This is our heart. And, most companies have these big, broad vision statements that, I find very trite. Ours is not. It took us a year and a half to develop those 13 words. We live it. This is what we're trying to do. Change the world, one cup of coffee at a time.
And then when do you do everything cold brew locally?
Everything's cold brew. Yep. Yeah. Everything's local. We produce it all. So it's all of our own coffees.
You have a plant in Tampa somewhere?
We do. Yep. We have these big, ginormous, kind of craft beer tanks that are very sophisticated. So we kind of borrowed technology from the craft beer world. They were produced locally in St. Pete by Brewfab, which is they're phenomenal. Love that company. And then borrowed technology from the pharmaceutical world to allow us to do what we do. So what we brew is really proprietary. I can never say that word right.
Proprietary.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. And so we believe that our cold brew top 5, maybe top 3 in the country. And without pasteurization, which is kind of counter to cold brewed coffee, we don't do it. Yet we still can achieve a very long shelf life, which is amazing. And so the product quality is phenomenal.
And your wife has a background in pharmaceuticals. Did that come from the same relationship, or
No, not
it's
really.
just random?
No. We had a wonderful guy who came out of the pharmaceutical manufacturing world, and he also, he managed and helped build plants for Publix. That was like kind of a white label sausage program. So he was very involved in the manufacturing world, and he was the guy that really helped us find this thing. I can't really share it because it is whatever that word is. Thank you.
How many cans of those will you sell in a year?
We brew tens of thousands of gallons a year.
That's cool.
Yep.
Gallons.
Gallons.
How many gallons is it, or how many of
10.5 ounces.
10.5?
So this little can right here has 10.5 ounces of liquid in it.
How many of those are in a gallon?
Well, there's 128 ounces in a gallon.
So 12-ish.
Yeah, something like that.
Give or take.
Yeah.
Me and you probably aren't the smartest. Me and you aren't the smartest to be answering that question.
Right. But we don't can everything. We also keg.
Okay.
So we sell kegs too. And bars and restaurants and hotels, all that kind of stuff by kegs too. But this little can has 325 milligrams of caffeine, which is the equivalent of 12 hot ounce cups of coffee. This is a power pack little thing, and we believe it may just give you some superpowers. I'm just saying. Ask your people. They're all fired up on it.
It's funny. I didn't ask you to bring coffee, so thank you for bringing it. We put a post out before, a story on Instagram before you came. It was like, hey, we're having Dave Ward on, Buddy Brew. At what questions do you want us to ask him? And then Seth, who you met, he said, ask him to hook us up with some nitros or some volts. So thanks for bringing that.
Of course.
How do you and Susan split responsibilities at this point in the business versus 2010, 2011, or when did she come on?
Well, she came out. So we opened our first cafe. She's been involved from the beginning, and really it was such a God story. I had kind of began writing a business plan. Her, kind of independent of me, was praying for her, what is she going to do next, right? And this idea of entrepreneurship was just put on her heart. And so, I'm going along this path, and then she goes, wait a second. This Buddy Brew thing, this is it. This is it. So that's kind of how it happened. And so she's been, right, equally alongside me all along the way. So we opened our first cafe April 27th of 2010. She joined the business full-time that year in June of 2010, very quick. And so it was her and I, and then, it's gone crazy. So the way we're organized today is that I'm the CEO. I run the whole business, and so my mission is to drive vision. It's to look for opportunity. All the divisional heads report to me. In an operational sense, so from that point of view, Suze does as well. But she also is responsible for all the brand, and if you know us, brand is so important, and so even though I may run the company, she's driving most of it, through that. She also runs all of wholesale, so that means she's responsible for not only the traditional wholesale side, but the whole CPG business. And she also runs our e-commerce site, so she's got a big job. That girl is super, super, super busy.
What have you guys had to work through from a marriage standpoint? These past 15 years of you're a husband and wife, but you're also business partners / somebody has to be in charge at times. Like, what have you had to work through, and what challenges did you have? And
Elliott, that's a very interesting question. It's a great question. No, so the challenges I think is that it never stops, because we're always together, and so kind of really trying really intentionally to kind of draw the line at the family. It has always been a challenge, and there's times where it just can't help but continue. The biggest thing is if we could survive this together, we can survive anything, right? And we've just kind of figured it out. I'm not going to say it's easy. I wouldn't recommend it, to be honest. It's a tougher road, but for us, it's completely worked. And in those moments when there's conflict, I believe God is a God of unity. So anytime there's conflict, that's not really of him. So we strive for that unity. And really, we won't make a decision until we're both in line with that. So I think that's kind of how we do it, right?
Did you self-fund this at the beginning? Did you ever raise money to date? Have you ever raised money or?
Great question. So we did self-fund, and we did one raise, and that was in the 2018, 2019 time period. So, and both were great, and essential. So
you mentioned 2019 being a rough year. What happened? I remember being together, working through that. In C12, we were together at that point. I think it was 2019. What went wrong in 2019?
Well, it was a tough year anyway. I mean, just from the economy, it was just a weird year. But we had some challenges as one of our biggest partnerships where they overbought coffee, and it was to the point where we're like, "Are you sure? Are you really sure? Serious?" And so we went back to them several times and said, "We'll do it."
I like it. You like your money,
right? And so as it turned out, I don't know if it was a mistake, but product sat in warehouses and aged out, and so we had to basically buy back all that coffee, and that was devastating.
Explain that. Why'd you have to buy it back?
That's the way it works.
They bought it and they didn't honor their part of the agreement, or?
I don't think honoring is the right way to say it, but I think, yeah. So the way any of these distribution agreements work is that if product doesn't sell, we have to buy it back. We don't really have that problem at all anymore. I mean, every once in a while there's other, but that because the quantities were. I mean, I'm talking like so ginormous. We're like. And in that moment, we're like, well, we don't even have enough people to do all this. So we brought in temps and all this stuff just to satisfy the order, and we did, and it was there on time, and the product was amazing and all that kind of stuff. But it probably wasn't. I don't really know what the reason was, but I do know what the reality of it was, and that's that we had to buy it back. And so that was probably the biggest challenge of that year. We also we had bought a cold brew system. I can't name names. I'm kind of bound still, but that was a complete scam. And as only I think God can orchestrate. This system is being delivered, and one of our buddies from the craft brew industry was like, "Oh my gosh, Buddy Brew, man, what are they getting? This is odd." They just had me driving by our production facility on Cass. And so he pulls up and he's like, "What is that?" And so he talks to our director of coffee, Phil Holstein, who's an amazing guy, been with us 14 years. He goes, "Dude, I don't know what you're buying, but that's not a new tank. That has been very heavily used. I wouldn't buy it. Don't whatever." So anyway, we're like, it's kind of in that moment our eyes were open, and the whole thing was a sham. This company had come to help install, and then from that point forward, it just went. So eventually, we had to sue them, and that was also devastating because that was at the time a few $100,000 in equipment, and
legal bills aren't cheap either.
No, and
did you win or did you settle?
We settled.
Yeah.
It went to mediation, and we came out whole. I mean, relatively. But when you're dealing with crazy, it's hard to it wasn't like it was a normal negotiation. It was like we were met with crazy. So, but it happened the way it was supposed to happen, and we ended up with those brew fab tanks where we designed the system from the bottom up, and it really has borne a lot of phenomenal fruit. So it's cool.
And then it turned around. You mentioned early 2020. Things had gotten a little better, and then for a lot, if not most businesses in the U.S., COVID hit, and I'm sure that was a rough experience and a rough year. You came through it. You came out of it.
Yep.
How'd you come out of it? Whole. I mean, Susan would argue that you're not whole. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Well, we did all the things that I think companies had to do. We reduced our staff size. Well, there was no business, and so from a cafe point of view, we did anything and everything that we could legally do to sell product, we did. And so whether it was deliveries, curbside service, social, I can't even remember what the word is anymore, spacing inside the stores, we did all that stuff, but we did it, and we did it with joy and happiness, the fact that we could even could do it. But during that time, business was like next to nothing. So we reduced our staff. We were probably at our highs, by half. We had to let go some executives that there just wasn't any need for them. So we furloughed a couple. We had to let a couple go. We cut all the fat out of the business we possibly could, and then we basically just prayed and pushed. That's what we did. That's how we got through it.
And at what point, give or take, did things turn around?
Well, 21, things started to improve. 22 was kind of a magical, weird year. That was like people are finally let out of the house. So it was like, boom. 23 was we grew, but it was a softer year, and 24 was a bad year. That was a toughie. It was flat, I think, from a restaurant perspective across everybody, not just Buddy Brew.
Were all the businesses down, or like just the cafe business?
The cafe business was down, and the cafes still represent about 65% of our business, right? So when that driver, is down, it's going to affect.
Interesting. The cafe is 65%, even with everything you're doing retail?
Yep.
That's interesting.
Yeah, but the cafe business is big.
Yeah.
And so, but wholesale was on fire.
Yeah.
So it was a great year from a wholesale perspective, and e-com had a really strong year. So from those points of view, it was okay, but it was tough. And then by 25 now, we saw something change in November of last year, and November 24. That's when all of a sudden, we had just come through the 2 hurricanes. Not good, by the way. That was another blow that made 24 really tough. We had a controller change in the beginning of that year, and that just was messed up. That was a bad gig.
Controller in terms of like the position controller?
Yeah,
okay.
The person who runs our financial stuff.
Yeah.
So we resolved all that, but by November it was like back, and it was back bigger than the rest of the year. And so we saw great gains in November and December, and it's just continued through the first quarter. We're back on fire. So.
And then the podcast being on Successful DNA, I'm glad we got to go through that, a lot of your story. What an incredible story. The past 15 years, you've evolved, you've learned a lot, you and Susan have learned a ton. What would you say, like, 2 or 3 things are that have made a difference, like, in you personally, to get you to where you are from a DNA inside of Dave standpoint?
Great question. 2 or 3 things. Well, first and foremost, God. I mean, it's our faith. I think without our faith, the business would have failed. I think our marriage probably could have failed. I think, God is everything, and this is his business. We're its stewards, and that carries us to this day. I mean, it's his. And so our DNA, our push is all based in that. And what that translates to from a business point of view is one simple thing. It's love, and it's love of the product that we get to serve. It's love of our people, our staff. It's love of our vendors, and it's a love of our customers, right? And that translates into something different than what you see in most other cafes and in most other companies we love. And this idea of hospitality, of opening your doors and bringing somebody in. And what do you do if you bring somebody home? You offer them something to eat and drink, right? That's what you do. And you end up in the kitchen, hanging around, right? The island or whatever. That is our cafes. And that's the whole point of what we do is designed around that one single thought, love and hospitality. And so that is woven into who Susan and I are. We were gifted with hospitality. We've always had people in our homes, and so we translate that and push that into our cafes. And so to this day and this very morning, I meet with every single new employee that comes into our business, right? And the whole point of, and Susan does as well, we both do. That's how important it is. And we have 120-ish employees, and so there's turnover. So, it's time, but it's time that we give because they have to understand the heart of our business, the soul of our business. And so that whole thing is like, taking the DNA from your perspective, right? And we call it torchbearers. We're creating torchbearers. And what we're doing is we're passing the torch to them, because now they're going to carry the torch to our customers, to their other coworkers. And that idea of just carrying the torch forward is the thing, right? So that is the biggest part of our DNA. Everything else, another part of our DNA is grit. We just don't give up. We press on. Even when, from a worldly point of view, there's no way, there's no path, there's no anything, we press on anyway. And so we just don't quit. And I think that separates us. And I think that's why so many businesses fail in the first year. People get involved and they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And even from an outsider's view, nobody understands kind of the weight of what this is. There's 120 people we're responsible for now. That's 120 paychecks that have to get paid. And there's been so many times we're like, I don't know how.
What was the lowest of lows the past 15 years of where you had to just absolutely grit through it?
Oh, COVID for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, last October wasn't so good either. That was a devastating blow too. But the thing about Buddy Brew is that we're the last to close and the first to open. We're going to be there serving a cup of coffee when there's nothing else happening, right? And the joy that it brings to these people, it's like you don't even know what this cup means. I lost my house. I lost everything. And here's a cup of coffee. What a blessing. But that's what we do. There's been floods where I'd love to say it was my idea. It wasn't. It was right in front of Kennedy. Water was 2 feet deep on Kennedy. Dead stopped during the middle of rush hour. And one of our employees had the bright idea. It's like, hey, we're going to take cups out to this line of traffic that you can't even see the end of it in either direction, and to start giving them cups. And they were out there for 2 hours, maybe even 3, handing out free cups of coffee to these people stuck in traffic going, I'm going to run out of gas. I don't even know what I'm going to do, kind of thing. And that's what we do. And I think that gets paid forward sometimes, and so, but it is that grit regardless of what the storm of the day is. C12, which you used to be involved in, right? The whole idea of the buffalo, which I think is such a great illustration of how we view our business, right? The buffalo is different than any other herd animal. Herd animals, when a storm is coming along the plains, what do? They turn and run. They run from the storm. And guess what happens? That storm just chases them. It's always at their backs, always chasing them. Well, the buffalo, they come together as a herd, and they turn and they run straight into the storm, because that's the fastest way through the storm.
That's what you've done.
That's what we do.
You're a buffalo.
We're a buffalo, baby.
We talked about it on the podcast a lot. The Bible says, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has conceived the plans I have for you, says the Lord. That's like your story in a nutshell, I feel like.
It is indeed.
From 2010, you couldn't imagine what has been up to this point.
It's unbelievable. I can't. I mean, looking back, I have my oldest child, my son, is getting ready to, he's a junior at Jesuit, and he's looking at colleges and trying to divine what his purpose in life is and what he wants to do. How can you know at 17? And I look at me. I had a coffee roaster. How could that even be? Right? So you never know, and it's the truth.
I had no entrepreneurship, ambitions, or no one in my family really was, and I was a teacher. Yeah. For a year.
Wow.
And I
didn't even know that about you.
So yeah, Lexington High School in Columbia, South Carolina. So I played, went to USC, played baseball there. Wasn't good enough to get drafted. With a teacher there, that lasted a day or two, and I was like, all right, this isn't what I was supposed to do. Yeah. And yeah, that's cool. So how are you handling? This is really for my personal agenda. How are you handling? And you've done a really good job. I'm a little behind you with a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. How have you handled raising kids while running a successful business? And you don't want to push your kids to the business or by any means, but do you have any thoughts about them taking over at all or anything?
I think in our heart of hearts, that would be an amazing thing. They're just too young, and so they've been brought up, in the business. They've always been around. I mean, there's so many fun pictures of when they were small, sitting in the roaster or whatever, So, but they've also seen the hardship, and they felt the stress at times, which we tried to guard them against that. But it is what it is, especially as a husband and wife team. But I think we have instilled in them this grit idea. It's like, it doesn't matter what's coming our way. We just put our heads down and push through. And they're both that way. They're amazing. My son, he thinks he wants a career in the film industry, directing, writing. He doesn't really know. And my daughter, she changes from time to time, but I think she went from veterinarian to now I think she's into dermatology. I don't know. But anyway, but their aspirations are big, and I love that chasing the dream, and I want that for them.
Did you have any grit influence in your life growing up, or did you have to develop that yourself?
Well, my family was a solid, just middle of the road, middle class kind of family. Mm-hmm. We weren't poor, but we certainly weren't rich. Mm-hmm. And so I think what was instilled in me early on was you got to work, and you got to work hard. And whether that's chasing sport or saving for the next stereo, right? It's you got to work to get what you want and work hard. So I think that work ethic was driven hard into us. So, my family, we did chores on Saturdays, and we couldn't go do whatever we want to do until every single one of those chores was done. It didn't matter. That's what was done, and that was driven into us. This also the idea of right and wrong. It was a black and white thing. There really isn't gray. It's either right or it's wrong. You choose right, Dave. That's what you do. And so that's kind of how I was brought up. And I had great parents. They were amazing. My mom was toughy.
Are they in Tampa?
They're unfortunately both dead now. But they were in Bradenton. They moved to Bradenton I'm from Wisconsin originally, and so they relocated to Bradenton. But they were amazing. It was a loving family. And I wouldn't say we wanted for much, but there was a lot we wanted as kids. And and they just drove that hard work ethic into us, and so that translated into whatever sports we happened to be playing, or wanting to buy the new Atari system or whatever it was. We worked hard. I worked. I had a paper route from age 10 on, and that's young for a paper route, dude. And then I waited tables, and I was a janitor at a church, all in high school, and I worked all the way through college. They didn't give it all to me. I was fortunate enough that they paid my tuition, but I had to pay everything else.
Does grit come up in your hiring process? And if so, how? And if not, like, what does come up in your hiring process? What do you look for when you hire?
Yeah, so I don't know if grit actually comes into it, although it's probably not a bad idea, so maybe we should. What we're looking for mostly in people is that they are people. If they don't love people, it's just not going to work. They're not going to fit into the culture that we've created. And so our whole interview is designed to kind of suss that out to the greatest extent possible. We can teach them coffee. We're very good at that. But if you don't have that thing inside you, that love for people,
you gotta have that thing.
You gotta have.
I agree with you.
Right?
We don't. We're not doing rocket science over here. So I agree with you. I can teach them in 2 days everything we do. Or we can teach them everything we do in 2 days. So by the time it gets, I teach our team how to hire, what we look for, and it was funny story. This happened recently. By the time it gets to me, and I've said it on the podcast before, I ask one question: what drives you? And I've probably done 8 interviews the past 30 days. And the one interesting answer I got, it wasn't even like the answer really, it was the emotion behind it. I won't say it, whether it was a he or a she, I don't want to give them away. So this person was raised by a single mom. And the emotion they had behind it about just wanting to make her proud and, more or less support her. was like, I was like, that's a very good answer. And they're like, oh, really? I didn't think it was. I was like, no, like I could just tell like the emotion behind it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So that person got hired.
That's cool.
And I can teach them everything else.
Yeah.
Because I know they're driven. And if they're driven, they're going to succeed here. Because every single employee here is someone who's driven, someone who wants success, someone who wants to take their life to the next level. And I'm going to push them to get them to that next level, whatever that may be. So that's been cool. As we wrap up, what's next for Buddy Brew?
Our goals from the beginning never were to be a mom and pop. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being a mom and pop, but we had bigger aspirations than that. So the first step was to become kind of a regional player in the specialty coffee business. We've done that. But the bigger goal was to be a national player in the specialty coffee business. And what I would say is that we have a voice nationally now. I don't think we're quite there yet. From an influence standpoint yet, but we're moving in that direction. I've said it once, I said it 100 times, and my wife cringes every time. It's world coffee domination in a kind, gentle, friendly way, right? So it's big, and so we're pushing hard to finally get into this stage where we can really accelerate the growth again. For a time, it was just about survival. It was getting it all back. It was building the team again. It was, diving into the shops and creating better efficiencies and everything necessary to make the shops gorgeous and run smoothly, right? And I think we're there. So the time now is focused on where are we going?
Is that all sectors in the business, or like particular ones, like the cafes, the wholesale, the everything, or?
Well, in the broader sense, it's the whole business, because that's where I think, if you look at like how valuable the business is, it's the whole business. I think from a cafe perspective, there's a lot of work left to do. I think in order to really be established, we need more cafes, and we currently have 8. I think it needs to be 15 or 20
locally, or.
Well, I think a big important piece of being able to establish a brand that carries outside of an MSA is building stores out of your MSA and making them very successful.
Where are you looking to first outside of Tampa?
I'm not saying. But
what state?
Oh, Florida.
Florida,
I believe, is the low-hanging fruit for sure. We have influence here. We are distributed. Yeah. Our wholesale products are all throughout Florida. There
makes sense, kind of hub and spoke, kind of, but starting in Tampa.
Exactly. And then there's the logistics of running a cafe out of our MSA, which is difficult, right? So, and we have a shop in Sarasota that kind of was our grand experiment, and we've learned a lot from that cafe. But it's time.
When can we expect that?
I would say it's not going to be 25, but definitely you'll see some stuff in 26.
More than one, or just one in 26?
Well, you see my bald spot? Can you see that?
Yeah.
That bald spot, every ring in that bald spot is a new cafe.
There you
go. We take our cafes super seriously. They're not cookie cutter. Is
Hyde Park still the best one, most profitable at least?
Yeah. That store is unbelievable.
It's always slammed.
That store is unbelievable. But so for us, when we go into a new market, we're going to become that market. So our cafe will be in line with what that neighborhood is and who they are. That's what we do. And so it's not simple. It's not just like pressing out cafes like most chains do. It isn't like that. Now, our infrastructure, how it all runs, the workflows, all that kind of stuff can translate, and they do. But the look, the feel, that takes a lot, and we take it super seriously. Aesthetic is everything.
That's cool, man. Well, hey, I'm 1,000% pulling for you. I've known you for, golly, 5+ years now.
Yep.
And I really appreciate, and everybody, it's not fake what everybody is going to see in this podcast, like how authentic you are and how genuine you are. I've noticed that since 2019, and I just want to say I appreciate it, man.
Oh, Elliott, right back at you, bud. It's been
awesome. I love you, bro, and I'm pulling for you. And I'm going to grow our hospitality brand to crazy places. And one day, we're going to have Buddy Brew in all our homes. So
I love that, bud. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Can you do me a favor? Can I put in a selfish plug?
Dude, you can do it. Yeah.
So for all you people out there, you can get Buddy Brew at Publix, Fresh Market, Sprouts, Whole Foods, and a bunch of others. You can also buy all of our products online at buddybrew.com. and the subscription service is awesome. So that means you can never have to run out of coffee. You can also purchase into our what we call perpetual brew, which is almost you pay it forward, and then it just kind of comes to you over time. So there's two different ways you can do it depending on what your needs are. So anyway, if you want some awesome coffee.
What about Amazon?
Oh, and Amazon as well. Thank you very much. Yeah, the Amazon is a growing business of ours. It's doing well. But so anyway, thank you, Elliott. It was amazing to be here, and I'm humbled by the opportunity, and it's just awesome to see you
we'll do it
what
again
you
in
do.
a year or two, and just God's going to explode Buddy Brew, man.
No,
It's
I'll
gonna
have
be fun.
That's what we're
Even
praying
more
for,
than
buddy.
he already has.
That's what we're praying for, baby.
So cool.
All right,
bro.
thank
Thanks.
you.
Yep.